morning, Detective.
Good morning.
Detective, you've worked with the Atlanta Police Department for about 10 years now.
Yep,
You've been a detective for 4.
that's correct.
You specifically work with theft and burglary cases.
Yes.
You work in a Zone 1, that's Northwest Atlanta, correct?
Yes.
So throughout your time there, you've investigated numerous theft and burglary cases, correct?
Oh, hundreds.
Detective, I'd like to turn your attention to February 8th, 2016. You received a call that day around 11:40 a.m.
Yes.
That call came from the Adams Crossing neighborhood,
Yes.
specifically 1234 Adams Overlook.
That's right, yeah.
This was in fact Mr. Howell's home.
Yes, it was Mr. Howell's home.
So when you arrived in the home, you noticed immediately that the house was a mess,
Yes.
and you later determined that a burglary had taken place.
Yes, burglary had taken place as well as a shooting.
So once you went into the home, you began your investigation, correct?
As I always do, yeah, once I arrive on scene.
You took some photographs, correct?
That's right.
You also lifted some fingerprints.
Yes.
Your Honor, permission to approach the witness with a document already into evidence.
Which is it? Yes, go ahead. Got a number?
I believe, excuse me, Exhibit 3.
Okay. Photo of the living room?
Excuse me 1 second. Detective, I'm handing you a photograph of Mr. Howell's living room as it was on February 8, 2016.
Yeah.
I asked the jury who has this photograph to follow along with me. Detective, when you were in this room, you lifted some fingerprints, correct?
Yeah.
So this table here that's open, there were no fingerprints on this that linked to the defendant, Mr. Michael.
No, there weren't.
And you would agree that these drawers are open here next to the sofa?
Those were open, yeah.
And there were no fingerprints on this table linking to Mr. Michael.
No, there weren't.
And the living room area, the pillows moved around there. You can't take any fingerprints on the couch there, can you?
No, that's not a surface that's conducive to leaving a fingerprint.
But you'd agree with me that it's messy in this room, correct?
Oh, yeah, it's a sty. It's not great.
And then straight through, you see that the kitchen is right over there. Is that right?
That's right.
And permission to retrieve the document from the witness.
Sure.
Detective, I'm approaching you with what has been already admitted into evidence as Exhibit 4. It's the photograph of the kitchen, Your Honor.
Sure, and why don't we just keep those up on the jury rail from now on,
Sure.
okay? So okay, that's a good place for exhibits, and then we have them. Well, looks like we already do have them. But we're getting more from the table, okay?
Detective, I'm approaching you with the photograph of Mr. Howell's kitchen as it was on February 8, 2016. To ask the jury to hold up the photograph that they have and follow along with me. Detective, you'd agree with me that the drawers next to the refrigerator here are open, correct?
Yeah.
And there were no fingerprints that linked to the defendant, Mr. Michael, on those drawers?
No, there weren't.
There's also some drawers open next to the oven and stove area,
Yep,
and there were no fingerprints on those drawers, were there?
that's correct.
And you'd agree that this cabinet is open as well?
Yeah.
And you also tried to lift fingerprints from this cabinet,
Yeah, we tried.
and there was nothing that linked to the defendant, Mr. Michael, is that right?
No, there were no fingerprints that linked to Mr. Michael. No.
Permission to retrieve the document from the witness, Your Honor.
Sure.
So, Detective, when you lifted fingerprints in the home, there was not one fingerprint in Mr. Howell's home that linked to Mr. Michael, is that right?
No, Mr. Michael didn't leave any fingerprints in the home when he was there.
Permission to read a stipulation to the jury?
Sure. Tell me which one, and...
Yes, Your Honor, it's going to be stipulation number 5. Fingerprints obtained from the Howell house matched Mr. and Mrs. Howell. No fingerprint matched Frank Michael. There were several fingerprints that were not identified. Detective, now I'd like to talk to you about the part of investigation that involved the Walter PPK handgun that belonged to Mr. Howell.
Okay.
You lifted fingerprints off that gun, correct?
Yes.
One fingerprint on that gun belonged to Mr. Michael.
Yeah.
One fingerprint on that gun belonged to Mr. Howell.
That's right.
And there was another set of fingerprints on that gun, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And those fingerprints were never identified.
No, it's unclear who those are.
Your Honor, permission to read a stipulation to the jury? And it's again, number 5, it's going to be the beginning portion.
Okay.
The State Crime Lab compared fingerprints taken from the Walter PPK .380 pistol to the victim Riley Howell and defendant Frank Michael. Prints from the pistol match both Riley Howell and Frank Michael. Several prints were not identified. Now, during your investigation, Detective, you had an opportunity to speak with Mr. Howell, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Howell gave you a brief description of the assailant in her home, is that right?
Yeah.
So after this incident happened on February 8th, you brought a photo array to Mr. Howell, didn't you?
Excuse me, yes, I did.
You presented 6 photographs right in front of him, is that right?
That's right, that's how a photo array is done.
And so these are individual pictures of just one person, is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And one of those photographs was actually Mr. Michael, wasn't it?
Yeah.
On that day, Mr. Howell was not able to identify the assailant on her home, was she?
Yeah, not through the photo array, no.
I'd like to talk to you about more of your investigation. Now, you actually confirmed that you are aware that Mr. Michael is a delivery driver, is that right?
Yes.
So you are also you also verified that Mr. Michael was in the Adams Crossing neighborhood in the middle of February?
In his capacity as a delivery driver?
Correct.
Yes, but I mean, I'm in that neighborhood all the time too.
But during your investigation, you actually verified that with the delivery company that Mr. Michael made a delivery on February 15th, is that right?
Yes.
So you confirmed that Mr. Michael was conducting a delivery route and he actually delivered something where in the same neighborhood that Mr. Howell lives, is that right?
Yes.
So Mr. Michael indicated to you that he was actually at Daddy D's barbecue joint on February 8, 2016, is that right?
Yeah,
Your Honor, assuming we're outside the presence of the jury, this is a statement made by the defendant, Mr. Michael, to the detective. So an opposing
Right.
party statement would be.
Opposing party from whom?
I'm sorry?
Who is he opposing from?
The
defendant made the statement, and the defendant is offering the statement, am I right?
Yeah, the defendant offered the statement to the
That's
officer.
his own statement, it's not a party opponent.
Um,
You are now trying to introduce the defendant's statement into evidence, are you not?
Correct, and
And that's your own client's statement, that's not
Yes.
any party opponent.
but he's the prosecution's witness.
I understand
and the
that.
statement made.
I understand that's who he is, but he's not offering it, you are.
Okay.
Over the prosecution's objection on by through me. All right, you go ahead, and we'll try to figure that one out later.
Okay. So he indicated to you that he was at Daddy D's restaurant on February 8th?
Yeah, he had this story lined up for an alibi. I didn't believe a word of it.
So when he told you he was in fact having lunch at 11:30 on February 8th, you didn't go to Daddy D's to see if he was actually there, did you?
No, because it was just an absolute lie.
You didn't go and check if there were any receipts from the restaurant?
I didn't have to.
You didn't go and speak to any management at the restaurant to see if he was in fact there?
Nope.
So at no point did you go to Daddy D's to see if Mr. Michael's alibi was truthful, did you?
No, I didn't.
No further questions?
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Please state your name, spelling your last name for the record, please.
My name is Frank Michael, M-I-K-E-L-L,
Where do you reside, Mr. Michael?
Atlanta,
How long have you lived here in Atlanta?
born and raised.
Can you tell us what you do for a living?
I'm a truck driver.
How long have you been a truck driver?
Going on about 7 years since high school.
Have you done anything else since high school or just?
Just a truck driver.
So Michael, the prosecution has accused you of burglary and aggravated assault. Did you do it, Mr. Michael?
No, I did not,
Why should we believe you here today?
because I wasn't there.
you weren't at the Howell home on February 8th, where were you?
I was at Daddy's D's barbecue.
And where is Daddy D's barbecue?
It's on Memorial Drive.
Is that near the Adams Crossing neighborhood?
No, it's not.
So Michael, let's talk about February 8th, 2016 a bit. You stated that you were having lunch at Daddy D's. Who were you having lunch with?
My best friend, Tyler Sullivan.
Now, Mr. Michael, February 8th was over 10 months ago now. How can you remember you were having lunch with Mr. Sullivan on that specific day?
Well, Sullivan's a good friend of mine. We mostly eat on Mondays.
Why specifically Monday, February 8th, did the two of you decide to go to lunch?
Well, that specific week was Tyler's birthday.
And what time did the two of you meet for lunch that day?
February
Yes, on February 8th.
8th? February 8th, we arrived at 11:30, like we usually do.
Well, how are you so sure that you met Miss Sullivan, at 11:30?
Positive it's at 11:30 because we go to Daddy's D's to beat the crowd. It's popular, so you gotta get there early.
Mr. Michael, do you and Miss Sullivan only see each other on Mondays?
Yeah, typically.
Why not on the weekend?
We're just busy. Monday's our thing. That's just what friends do. I don't know. We set a schedule and keep to it.
Mr. Michael, what day of the week was February 8th?
It's a Monday.
Mr. Michael, we've heard some testimony today that you stole a Walther PPK handgun. Did you in fact steal this gun?
No, I did not.
And can you please tell us why you did not steal the gun?
I didn't steal it because I found it. There's a difference.
Where did you find it exactly?
I found it on Ladon Lane.
And where was it in Ladon Lane specifically?
It was in the bushes. I saw it in the bush.
And what were you doing that day when you found it?
On that day, I was working and I was making a delivery. And as I was making the delivery, I noticed something shiny in the bushes. And I checked it out to see what it was.
Mr. Michael, do you recall around when you, like what month, what time did you find this gun?
Yeah, it was February. I'm not sure the exact date, but it was the middle of February.
Middle of February, okay. And Mr. Michael, where exactly is Ladon Lane?
Ladon Lane is in the Adams Crossing neighborhood.
So you testified that you found this gun, you found it in the bushes while you were working on the delivery route.
Yep.
Can you just tell us what you did after you found this gun?
Well, when I saw the gun, I picked it up because I knew it was probably valuable. So I took it and I went and I tried to turn it into cash.
Okay, so you say that you took it, and why exactly did you want to sell it?
I wanted to sell it because I knew financially I'm struggling.
And why are you struggling financially, Mr. Michael?
Well, my father recently passed away. My mother's very sick. I'm all alone, so I needed some money.
Now let's talk about when you sold the gun and how you sold it a little bit. Where exactly did you go to sell the Walter PPK handgun?
I went to a pawn shop in Henry County.
And where exactly is Henry County in relation to Fulton County, where Mr. Howell lives?
It's about 30 miles away.
And why did you go all the way to Henry County to sell this gun?
Like I said, I thought it was stolen, so it wasn't the smartest thing, but I thought I should go somewhere else to sell it.
And why did you think it was stolen?
I mean, there's a gun in the bushes. It was pretty suspicious, so I thought it was stolen.
Mr. Michael, you admit here today that you took something that was not yours. Why should we believe you that you did not steal this gun?
Because I wasn't there. I wasn't there when allegedly this crime happened, and I was eating lunch with my friend Tyler.
Any further questions?
All right, cross-examine. Oh, and for the defense.
Mr. Howell was unable to identify the assailant in his home on February 8th. Detective Carter told us that today. And the actual victim in this case, Mr. Howell. Earlier today, my partner, Ms. Fornes, came up here, and she asked you to keep in mind 2 points throughout today's trial. One, that Mr. Michael was not in Mr. Howell's home on February 8, 2016. And two, that Mr. Michael found the gun. He did not steal it. This one is also explained to you that the prosecution, represented by Mr. Obey and Mr. Rivera, had a burden to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Michael committed the crimes they are charging with him: burglary and aggravated assault. They did not do that here today. Let's begin to talk about why. Prosecution's case in chief had two witnesses today. The victim in this case, Mr. Howell, and the lead investigator, Detective Cameron Carter. Mr. Howell took the stand and gave a brief description of who was in his home on February 8th. Said that he was white race, had short, dark hair. He indicated that he was average build, average height. Detective Carter indicated that he presented a photo array to Mr. Howell. 6 photographs with one person in each photo. Detective Carter indicated today that Mr. Howell could at no point identify the assailant in our home. That's what the prosecution has told us here today. Detective Carter also indicated that there were no fingerprints in the Howell home. The only piece of evidence linking Mr. Michael to this crime is a handgun that he told you today he had in his hand. Let's go into those 2 points that I mentioned earlier. That first point, that Mr. Michael could not have been in Mr. Howell's home on February 8th. Today, on cross-examination, I spoke with Detective Carter about the Howell home. And he indicated when he walked in, he saw the house was a mess. And I presented Detective Carter with this photograph. And you had a chance to review this today as I was asking the questions. And he agreed with me that this house, that there was a mess here in the living room, the table was open, the drawers were open. And Mr. Howell indicated that he did not open these drawers. At no point did Detective Carter find any fingerprints in this room that matched the defendant, Mr. Michael. I also went over with the detective another key room in the Howell home, the room that Mr. Howell was shot in. In this room of the home, again, there are drawers open, the cabinet's open here. Mr. Howell indicated he did not open these drawers. His assailant did. And these drawers were open here, and I asked Detective Carter if he lifted fingerprints, and he said he did today. And he said that no fingerprints were found that matched the defendant, Mr. Michael. I then asked Detective Carter, did you find any physical evidence that the defendant was in Mr. Howell's home? Found nothing. Now, you also heard from, Mr. Howell, who described the events that happened that day. And again, at no point could he visibly see who was in the home, and again, during that photo array, could not identify the assailant. From February 8th to today, Mr. Howell cannot surely identify who was in his home the day he was shot. For the defense, you also heard from Mr. Sullivan, who was a friend of Mr. Michael's, and he indicated to you today that he was having lunch with Mr. Michael on February 8th at Daddy D's Barbecue on Memorial Drive. Ms. Sullivan said that Mr. Michael could not have been there because they were at lunch, and they go to lunch almost every Monday, and they always meet at 11:30 a.m. Now, when Ms. Sullivan indicated to Detective Carter that there was potentially an alibi, Detective Carter at no point went to Daddy D's Barbecue to speak with management, to see if there were any receipts to indicate they were there. He simply ignored it. You also heard from Mr. Michael today. And Mr. Michael confirmed that he was with Ms. Sullivan on February 8th. He said they met at 11:30 like they always do. And they met that week specifically because it was his good friend's birthday that week. And I asked him too, I said, why don't you guys ever meet on the weekends to go out? Their thing is going out and having lunch on Mondays. It's convenient for Ms. Sullivan's schedule and his schedule. Now to that second point, that Mr. Michael found the gun, he did not steal it. Now this Walter PPK silver handgun is a very nice handgun. Mr. Howell testified to that earlier. And one day, Mr. Michael said that he was on his delivery route, which was confirmed by Detective Carter, that he indicated on the delivery route that he found the gun in the bushes on Ladon Lane. Now Ladon Lane is and Mr. Howell's home are separated by woods. It's about 4 miles distant. Detective Carter, again, he stood up here today and he confirmed that Mr. Michael, in fact, was on a delivery route. And that's what Mr. Michael told you. It was the middle of February, he was on his delivery route, and he found something shiny in the bushes and picked it up. That's not where, we don't dispute that here today. The detective also testified that this handgun had fingerprints on it, and one belonged to Mr. Michael. Again, Mr. Michael told you he had the gun. In fact, he took it to Henry County and he sold it for $450. Now he understands that the gun might have been stolen. However, he was going through, he was struggling financially. His father recently passed away and his mother is disabled. And at times he even has to borrow money from his uncle. Now, I want to talk about what actually happened on February 8, 2016. Now, you heard today that Mr. Howell went home from work in the middle of the day around 11:30 because he forgot some papers for work that day. And that is when he was shot and someone had broken into his home. It's fair to say that that individual ran out the back door, as the evidence indicates, ran through the woods, and just threw the gun into the bushes. And about a week later, Mr. Michael was making his delivery route, and that's when he found that gun. Ladies and gentlemen, no one disputes here today that what happened to Mr. Howell was a horrible incident. However, we cannot say Mr. Michael was anywhere near the Adam Crossing neighborhood on February 8th. And as you go back and you review all the evidence and testimony about today, I want you to keep in mind a couple of questions that the prosecution was unable to answer today, and they cannot answer. Why were there no fingerprints in Mr. Howell's home that matched the defendant, Mr. Michael? Why didn't Detective Carter go to Daddy D's and see if Mr. Michael was in fact having lunch that day? Why are there a third set of fingerprints on the Walter PPK handgun that went unidentified? Ladies and gentlemen, there is your reasonable doubt. And for those reasons, the prosecution cannot answer any of these questions today. And for those reasons, we ask that you find Mr. Michael not guilty of the crimes they are charging him with.